Well, this is, late. Sorry.
Welcome to the program. This is Metal Robot Reviews.
Welcome to the Metal Robot Reviews channel. I'm your host, Tom McKay. Do you remember when 2016 was supposed to be the worst year? Ha! 2016 is a visit from Jesus' left testicle compared to 2020. 2020 is the literal plague. Let's get that shit straight. But despite the year being what it is, we still had a very good year for music. Not 2019 good, but after 2020, aka I'm never drinking Corona again. 2020, aka my ass is chafed. 2020, aka the mass of the devil's balls. 2020, aka Where was I going with this? Right, I still think it's safe to say this year's music was better than nothing at all. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the top 10 best metal albums of 2020. Same rules as previous years. If it's not on the list, I probably didn't hear it, or I did hear it and it just didn't make the list. I should say there is a difference in that there's not going to be a worse list this year. Not that there weren't any bad albums. Oh boy, there were bad albums. It's just I'm short for time. And while I know that historically 2 out of 3 times the worst list did better in terms of views, look, 2020 sucks as it was, okay? So can we just bring some positivity here? Please? Please? But before we get to the top 10, I want to talk about an album in this year's edition of The People vs. MRR, a segment of the show where I talk about an album that everybody agrees deserves to be on its respective list, but I disagree, for whatever reason that might be. This segment usually runs the risk of pissing somebody off, so let's hope it's different this year. Alright, who do we have? Oh my god, I'm gonna die before I'm 30 if this keeps up. Oh fuck! Okay, let's get one thing straight right now. I don't hate this album, okay? I don't. I really enjoyed it, actually. As I talked about on my written review on themetalrobot.com, this album actually did a great job of encompassing everything these guys have done before into one single album. And I agree with everybody else who creamed themselves so hard that their creamed itself. This album is ferocious, it's heavy, it's aggressive, it's surprisingly consistent given how many styles they threw into this thing. And based on that criteria alone, this should win a spot on the list, right? Well, despite all of that, even with its consistency in mind, the track listing is unbalanced. I talked about this on the written review as well, but when only the first half of the album is released as singles, that's usually a bad sign. And while it wasn't as bad as I feared, it's still disappointing to understand why they did that. Don't get me wrong, The Defiant and Sickness Unto You are straight bangers, but in comparison to the literal first half of the album, it just felt like they didn't match up. The same goes for the rest of the songs on the album as well, especially the closing track. Like, what the fuck? Of all the songs that feel weak on this album, why was it the closing track? I mean, it's fine, it's a good song and all, but it kind of just showed up and made the album just end. There's no high note, there's no last effort of anger and ferocity. It's just like, that's it guys, show's over. There's nothing else here to hear, so go home. Because of the 4 only good songs that we got before the closer, when we started off so fucking strong, I don't know, the closer just didn't feel earned. And for a Trivium record, that's a crime in and of itself. Look, it's a great album, one of the greater albums from 2020. Like I said, I was really tempted to put it on the list. It definitely deserves to be on a best of the year list somewhere. But if the literal last half of the album is not gonna step up to the first half, well, then I can't put it on mine. Sorry, boys. Next time? Please, don't kill me. But you know what? That's okay, because with what we were missing from Trivium, 2020 music more than made up for it with the top 10. So without further ado, let's begin at number 10.
Number 10.
Okay, so I know my ideology should be preventing me from putting these guys on the list, especially seeing as they have a very similar stint to bands like Nightwish and Insomnium, and I usually try to not give too much praise to bands who aren't trying anything new. But ask yourself this, are they really one or the other? Here's the thing, there's never going to be anything solely unique about any one band on Earth. When that does happen, they'll top my list and I'll make sure to talk about them non-stop until someone staples my mouth shut. Also, while you're at it, can you staple my ass shut? Because if I don't shit, I don't need to waste more toilet paper, okay? I can't go through the waste of toilet paper again! But what's different about these guys, especially on the Winter Way, is the layers. It's not just the screeching vocals and electronic strings on this album. Synths, choirs, and an overall wall of sound approach still feels dynamic as well, comes together to create something that's uniquely theirs. The closest comparison I can think of is maybe Winter Sun, but even then, those guys are unique in and of themselves, so there's not a lot of concrete reference points. And even then, Atavistia still comes out with an album that feels like a journey and a half. I felt like I was walking over the Rocky Mountains with every progression, every step, every beat, and every scream. It felt like the album enveloped me into the experience. That's not easy to do. So, yeah, Atavistia makes it to number 10.
Number 9.
You bet your ass this one grew on me. I was already fairly kind to it in my original 10-second Purge review, and I did have an extended review I was writing up for it, but it never got finished because, I suck. But basically, I made the comparison between this album and its predecessor, The Darkness. And while I think both albums are great, what makes me go for this one a bit more is emotional tonality. Both invoke the feeling of isolation, depression, and sadness, but why I feel like I could gravitate towards this one more is because this one felt way heavier in terms of the emotional tonality, more heavy than something that I can personally relate to. With that album, it felt like the protagonist was drowning, begging and screaming for someone to help them pull them out of the heavy waters before they're lost forever to their own crushing mental illness. Yeah, that's pretty fucked up. And while I'm sure there are people out there who can relate more to The Darkness compared to Waves, what draws me more towards Waves is the fact that it feels more like a plight from someone in isolation. Someone who wants to join the world at large but can't cope with the negative outlook, either because of their psychosis or because of the crushing world, believe it or not, social media already creates for us every single day. That's my interpretation at least, and as someone who lives on the internet, more than I like to admit, I still feel like I relate to that a lot more. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what it's about, and I would argue it's not, but for me, that's what I was getting out of this. And if I can relate to this album more than I can to its predecessor, and feel like this one does it way better, then yeah, Waves takes the cake.
Number 8.
And that small bit of music just made me soil myself. If you excuse me, I need to change real quick. I'll be right back. Yeah, this one shouldn't be much of a surprise if you know my taste in music. Heavy, progressive, and melodic. All the staples of music that I personally dive into like an outdoor pool. And much like an outdoor pool, I run the risk of catching a virus. Thank you. I know. My talent for comedy is unparalleled to all. This album, in only a few words, is what I would call the sound that used to be. What I mean by that is, this is an album for fans who want to hear a particular sound from a band that's not doing that sound anymore. And in this case, it's Dream Theater. While Octavarium is my personal favorite album of all time, don't at me, Train of Thought is one of my personal favorite styles of Dream Theater, both as a progressive and metal fan. And in this case, Haken's Virus really reminds me a lot of that style, while still keeping to their own identity, and still being themselves without turning into Dream Theater. And that is really impressive. I really enjoy this album for that specific reason. Not to mention, it's just an overall eclectic and heavy album to listen to. So, yeah, definitely worth a listen.
Number 7.
As I said with the Quarter 3 10-second Purge video, in regards to a different album, your instrumental album has to be doing something right, if it can be orgasmic without the use of vocals. And with Kilter's metal jazz fusion album Axiom, yeah, it's got orgasm literally in its name. Really, it does. Take Axiom, right? Okay, you just rearrange a couple letters, drop a few, Alright, now we'll add a few letters and boom, orgasm! Now this is something that Kilter has done before with their 2018 release, so you could argue they're not really doing anything new here. But with these guys, there's nothing similar about them. Their sound is, on its own, something that has not been replicated anywhere else. I tried to find comparisons elsewhere, but any comparison I could find immediately fell apart with every passing listen. Kilter has created a sound that is rooted in the New York jazz scene, but also features metal grit that is unmatched by even New York hardcore. And all of this, mind you, is done without the use of a vocalist. It's just pure anarchy and elegance with every single track without a single word being sung, screamed, or even spoken. No joke, that's impressive shit. Well done. Well done.
Number 6.
So I'm going to keep this one fairly brief because if you heard what I heard as well, you know why they're on the list. You see, Unleash the Archers already has a knack for pulling off something like this, but never before have they had such huge scope for adventure and thrill. Abyss just shows how great power metal can really be once it steps up to the plate. And maybe it's because they're Canadian and I may have a bit of a bias in that regard, we might come back to that later, but really right now these guys are at the top of their game. At times that power metal cheese does shine through, but thankfully it's not often, and when it does, you barely notice it. The majority of the time, you're spent on a journey with the rest of the band through the cosmos. A part of me would even dare to call this progressive metal with its many ideas and concepts, but don't worry, Octavarium, this ain't. This is a great power metal album that any metalhead worth their salt needs to get into.
Number 5.
Moving into the top 5, we have an album that I'm shocked made it as high as it did. Legit, when I reviewed Ambassador a couple of years ago with Belly of the Whale, I thought it was good, but I felt like something was missing from it. Like, it had that head trip I was looking for, but it felt like something was missing. With VALE, on the other hand, not only did they bring that head trip back, but they also leaned more into the heavier side. And that's when I realized that's what I was missing. On top of that, I feel like Ambassador went the more traditional song route here. What I mean is that a lot of these songs I can see being played on rock radio at some point. Granted, they're a bit long for radio, but who cares? The point is that they have really stepped up their game since 2018. I think it's safe to say they're in their element here. If they do stay the same the next time out, I mean, I won't be complaining, but I really am excited to see what they might build upon with this sound the next time they release an album. I'll have to wait and see.
Number 4.
Okay, I'm kind of cheating a little bit here, given that, according to TDW, this album was actually released in January of 2021, and according to the promotional material, same thing. But it was available on streaming platforms in December, so yeah, I'm including it here. A surprisingly well-constructed mix of symphonic, progressive, death, and even just metal. The Days the Clock Stop is an album that pushes the envelope and actively challenges you to listen to it the entire time. I mean, if you were planning on putting this album on in the background, good luck. Tom DeWitt made damn sure that would be impossible. The Days the Clock Stopped is an album that actively demands you pay attention to it. And when you do, you're sucked into a whirlwind of emotions and confusion. But the good kind. The kind that I think Tom DeWitt wanted to channel to tell his story about being in the hospital and confronted with death. This dreamscape is dreamy, it's beautiful, it's intense, and it's chaotic. And that's just the music. Add on Tom's silky yet gritty baritone, and you've got one hell of an experience waiting for you. With all of that combined, like I said, this album perfectly encapsulates the confrontation with death in one's darkest moment. A chilling, adventurous, and dark album from front to back. Tom, you really outdid yourself with this one.
Number 3.
So when talking about the Oubliette in my 10-second purge review, I mentioned that this was old and new Opeth combined, and since listening to it multiple times since that first time, I still stand by that fact. This is an album that I feel like many old Opeth fans can really get into. Okay, that might sound a little over-exaggerated, and in a way it can be, but here's why I said that first time, and why I still stand by that. What do you think about when you think about Opeth? Possibly complicated arrangements, maybe driving grooves, acoustic guitars, silky cleans, and demonic growls. Perhaps even heavy, in-your-face metal parts alongside atmospheric acoustic sections. Well, yeah, that's the Oubliette in a nutshell. And while this may not be an exact replica that I'm sure many old Opeth fans have been waiting for, this is still something that'll send many new and old Opeth fans running for the fucking hills, and possibly the online store to get the physical copy of this album, because going to stores to get it is dangerous. Stay home and be a hermit. This is the way. Plus, with the deep dive into the decaying mind of Henry, our protagonist, it all comes together into a journey through a mind falling apart by disease. Easy recommend, 100%, and yet it's still not the best of the year. Say, who is in the top 2 anyways?
Number 2.
Huh. Huh. Okay, so this video is being written and recorded a good month and a half after what's being called the Trump insurrection. And given a particular person who was spotted in the mob, it might make this choice either surprising or teeth-grittingly exacerbating. Well, yeah, me too. For a while, this album was guaranteed a spot on the list, no matter what. But then, when the events of January 6th happened, all of a sudden, I was debating whether or not I should include it on the list. Especially seeing as the other half of Demons and Wizards is, let's just say not taking the news well. But here's what did it for me for keeping this album on the list. What really did it for me was, after giving it another listen, I came to the conclusion that this list has nothing to do with outside events, whatsoever. Yes, I do think that Sheffer is a scumbag, and as far as I'm concerned, he can become someone's fun toy in prison, and I would love to hear all about that. But really, what are we here to watch? Are we here to watch me judge the actions of one man? No, absolutely not. That's what the Metal Robot Podcast is for, which, by the way, me and Curtis actually did do a talk about this over on the Metal Robot Podcast. Hint, hint, click, click. We are here to talk about the best metal albums of 2020. Band members aside and their actions aside, the music is all we care about. And really, after a year of one catastrophe after another, 3 still holds up really fucking well. To be fair, even without the arguably great guitar work by the negative 9 IQ bear spray enthusiast, the vocals by Hansi Kirsch still hold up really well, enough to hold the rest of the weight. Hell, I would argue you could have any potential Nazi playing guitar, it would not change the godlike performance of the person behind the mic. Add the composition of every single song and you get a blistering and magical hour-long experience. And if this really is going to be the last album we hear from these guys as this group, well, then I'm glad that we can go out on such a high note. Musically, at least. What happened on Capitol Hill is how you go out tripping over a racist Cheeto. Fuck you, Sheffer! So now, we're getting ready to talk about the best album of 2020. But before we do that, let's follow tradition and talk about the best EP of 2020, because I feel like the EPs don't get enough love by year's end, so who do we get this time out?
Best EP.
To explain this one, I like to pull a clip from a friend of mine.
The one comment I've seen out of all of these made a man cry. I'm talking about Tom McKay from the Metal Robot Reviews.
And it still does! Okay, so obviously the crying is a joke, but really, this EP is beautiful. It's dark, depressing, probably needs a therapist, but it's beautiful. This isn't a death metal, black metal, or even a symphonic metal album. It's arguably just a metal album, but it's the composition that takes that style to a whole new level. It's influenced by so many cultures and styles and brings it all together into one cohesive and spine-chilling sound. The clear influence being displayed here is a sort of gothic, kind of demonic cult type of sound. And here's the thing, when done right, that style can invoke such a strong emotional response. And I believe Shadöccult's core member, Marty Steele, understands that to a T on songs like Ritual and Brotherhood. Which, side note, if for whatever reason you don't have time to listen to the full 25-minute EP, in quarantine, then at the very least, check out Ritual. Holy shit, check out Ritual. You will not regret it. But that's not the best album of 2020. It's the best EP by a fucking mile. But what full-length album has been crowned the Metal Robot's best metal album of 2020? Well, if you've been reading my written reviews on the website, you might know which one that is by now.
Number 1.
I mean, let's be real here. You probably should have seen this one coming. Sleepwraith may be a new band, but the members have been around for quite a while in the metal scene, in various different projects, various different sounds. Then in 2020, bringing all of it together into one unique and pulse-pounding death metal sound. But make no mistake, this is not the kind of pure death metal that you might be thinking about. Although there are those kinds of influences in here, this is an album that needs to be heard to be believed. It's an album that encompasses the idea that this group has for a nightmare that you cannot escape, but also makes you question whether or not you're awake or asleep. Honestly, I wrote that and I didn't realize I rhymed it there. It was an unintentional rhyme and I love it. I knew from the moment this album came out and when I first heard it, that this was going to be an album that was going to top the list. Guaranteed, 110%. I legit, as the year went on, kept telling myself, look man, there's nothing else coming out this year that's going to top Sleepwraith. Not a single one. The only thing that could possibly top it is maybe a whiskey bottle from Lemmy, blessed with the sounds of Dimebag Darrell, and brewed by the guys Iron Maiden hired to make it their beer or something. Even then, that's a long shot. And here we are, Sleepwraith bringing forth a nightmare that makes your nightmares feel like wet dreams. A collection of sonic ideas and soundscapes that make this album the best metal album of 2020. And if this is the debut for this project, whoa, I can't wait to hear what fucking nightmares these guys will come up with next. So that's my list for the top 10 best metal albums of 2020. Thank you so much for your patience with this one. But with this out of the way, we can finally get to music from 2021 and move on to a new year. Oh, and if you're worried about the worst list of 2020, well, Five Finger Death Punch. So how about you? What is your list for the top 10 best metal albums of 2020? Let me know in the comments down below. But like I said, thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video, then make sure to hit the like button. And if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Ring that fucking bell or else 2020 will never end. Please just end 2020. We want to be done with this year. Please just make it stop. And I'll see you in the mosh pit next time. Have a good night.